Welcome back to Gravepath Stories. Tonight, I have 5 untold disturbing true New Year's Eve horror stories for you. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed, because once you step onto the grave path, you don't walk alone. I had my gloves off and my hands inside the back of the transmitter cabinet when the countdown started again, loud enough to rattle the metal door against my shoulder. I remember swearing out loud, not scared yet, just annoyed, because I had already cut the feed 10 minutes earlier. Midnight had passed. The new year was done. The equipment was supposed to be silent, except for the low hum of power. Instead, a recorded voice came through the monitor speaker, steady and calm, counting down like it still believed time was waiting for it. 10, 9, 8. I pulled my hands out fast and smacked my elbow on the frame. I stared at the speaker, then at the clock bolted above the rack. It read 12:47. Not even close. I leaned in and turned the volume knob down, but the voice didn't change. It kept counting at the same pace, same tone, like the knob wasn't connected to anything anymore. 7, 6. I told myself it was a looped tape, some leftover programming error. That kind of thing happened more often than people think. Old systems, old wiring. Half the city still running on equipment installed before I finished high school. I reached for the main switch and killed power to the cabinet entirely. The hum stopped. The indicator lights went dark. 5, 4. The voice kept going. That was the first moment I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. No power meant no output. There was no battery backup on that cabinet. I knew it the way you know your own name. I stepped back, listening, my mouth dry. The sound wasn't coming from the speaker anymore. It was coming from the air itself, faint but clear, like someone standing just behind me. 3, 2. I spun around, flashlight swinging, heart hammering. The maintenance room was empty. Concrete walls. One metal chair. A dust-covered bulletin board. Nothing else. When the voice reached one, it didn't stop. It reset. 10. I stood there breathing hard, telling myself not to panic. I flipped the breaker for the entire substation. Everything went dead. Emergency lighting cut in, dim and yellow. Still, the countdown continued. Quieter now, but steady, like a whisper pressed directly into my ears. I grabbed my coat and keys and left the room without locking it. The radio on my belt crackled as soon as I hit the hallway. Dispatch was trying to raise me, her voice sharp with irritation. "Where are you? We're getting calls." A lot of them. I told her I was on site and asked what kind of calls. There was a pause. Then she said, "People say their radios are counting down again." Same countdown. They want to know why the new year keeps restarting. I stopped walking. "That's not possible," I said. The feed's cut. "Well, it's happening," she said. "One guy says it's been going for over an hour." I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about the voice continuing after the power went out. About how it hadn't sounded like it was coming from the equipment at all. "Can you trace it?" she asked. "I'll try," I said, even though my stomach tightened when I said it. Back in the truck, I powered up the mobile receiver and started scanning frequencies. The signal was everywhere. Not strong, not weak, just present, bleeding into every band like it didn't care about rules. Wherever I tuned, the countdown followed. 10, 9, 8. Calls kept coming in. Dispatch put some through directly. An older woman said the voice was coming from her kitchen radio, even though it wasn't plugged in. A man near the river claimed it was coming through his baby monitor. One caller was crying, saying her husband had collapsed when the voice reached 0 the first time and hadn't woken up since. I told myself people panic on holidays. They exaggerate. They connect things that don't belong together. Still, my hands shook as I turned the truck toward the old relay road. The abandoned tower wasn't on any current map. It had been dismantled years earlier, after a lightning strike damaged the structure beyond repair. I'd signed off on the decommissioning paperwork myself. I remembered the place clearly because it had always felt wrong, even in daylight, even with a crew around. The land dipped strangely there, like the earth had sagged under its own weight. As I drove, the countdown synced with my turn signals, the clicks lining up with each number. I shut the signals off. The voice kept counting. When I reached the gate, it was open. That didn't make sense. We'd welded it shut after the last inspection. I got out of the truck and stood there, listening. The countdown was louder now, no longer confined to the cab. It seemed to come from the ground, from the trees, from inside my own skull. I walked in with my flashlight raised, boots crunching on frozen gravel. The tower itself was gone, just a ring of concrete anchors and a squat building half buried into the slope. The door to that building stood ajar. 10. I told myself I was doing my job, that people were scared and needed answers. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled like dust and old metal. The equipment racks were still there, stripped of anything valuable, wires cut and dangling. In the center of the floor sat a single tape machine, powered on, reels turning smoothly. I froze. There was no power here. The main line had been severed. I walked closer, every step heavy. The tape was labeled in my own handwriting. New Year Emergency Countdown. I stared at it, my head buzzing. I didn't remember making that tape. I knew the handwriting, though. Same slant, same pressure. My chest tightened. 9, 8. I reached for the stop button. My finger hovered, then pressed down. Nothing happened. The tape kept moving. 7. I yanked the power cord from the back of the machine. The reels didn't slow. They didn't even hesitate. 6. My radio crackled. Dispatch again, her voice barely controlled. We just lost a substation, she said. And a hospital generator kicked on by itself. They're hearing it there now. The countdown, it's in the hallways. 5. I backed away from the machine. My thoughts raced. This wasn't a broadcast anymore. It was something else, something that had learned how to use the system and then shed it. 4. Who made this tape? I whispered, though I was alone. 3. The voice changed then. Not the words, but the tone. It sounded closer, more personal, like it was leaning toward me. 2. I realized what it was counting toward. Not midnight. Not the new year. It was counting cycles. Each reset marking another failure, another reach into the city. 1, the voice said, softly. The machine stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. My ears rang. I waited for the reset, my muscles coiled. It didn't come. I stood there shaking until my radio crackled again. This time, dispatch sounded stunned. It stopped, she said. Everywhere. Whatever you did, it stopped. I didn't answer. I was staring at the tape machine, at the label, at the date written beneath it. Test run. Do not air. The date was tomorrow. I drove back in a fog. By the time I reached the station, emergency crews were already dealing with the aftermath. 2 heart attacks, 1 unexplained seizure, a handful of people hospitalized for panic. No official cause linked any of it to the broadcast, because officially there had been no broadcast. I filed a report that night. I wrote everything down except the part about the tape. I told myself I'd come back for it with backup, daylight, witnesses. When I returned the next morning, the building was empty. The tape machine was gone. No tracks, no signs of removal. In its place, on the concrete floor, someone had written a new label in dust. Next countdown scheduled. I quit my job a month later. Moved away. I don't keep a radio in my house. I don't watch the clock on New Year's Eve. I sit with the lights on and my hands over my ears, because every year, just after midnight, I swear I can hear it, faint and patient, starting again at 10, like it's still waiting for me to finish what I started. I answer the phone without looking at the screen because the line lights up red and my trainer nods at me to take it. My headset feels too tight, like it always does when I'm nervous, and my fingers are already hovering over the keyboard. I say the script automatically, my voice steadier than I feel, and then I hear breathing on the other end. Slow, uneven, like someone ran before dialing. I ask for the address. There's a pause. Then a woman says it, clear and calm, like she's reading it from a card. I type it in, and the system flashes an error. I ask her to repeat it. She does exactly the same, right down to the hesitation before the street name. I tell her the address isn't coming up and ask what's happening. She says there's been an accident at a New Year's party. People are hurt. Someone isn't moving. I glance at my trainer, expecting her to lean in, but she's already watching another screen. I ask the woman how many people are injured. She says she doesn't know. She says it's loud and everyone's screaming. In the background, I hear music, distorted, and then a shout that cuts off abruptly. I start running through the checklist, asking about bleeding, asking if anyone is unconscious. The woman answers calmly, too calmly, like she's narrating something she already knows the ending to. When I ask for a contact number, in case we get disconnected, she gives me the same number that's already on my screen. That's when I finally look at it. The system highlights the line in gray. Disconnected. Deactivated years earlier. I feel a cold rush in my stomach. The kind you get when you miss a step on the stairs. I tell myself it's a glitch. Training drills this into us trust procedure, not instinct. I ask her to stay on the line. She says she will. I try to dispatch units anyway, manually overriding the address field, but the map refuses to place it. I zoom out, then in. The street doesn't exist. I type slower, double-check spelling. Nothing. The woman on the line suddenly says someone else is calling. I tell her to keep talking to me. She doesn't respond. Instead, the line clicks, and a new voice comes on without the call dropping. A man this time, breathing hard, shouting over fireworks. He says the same address before I even ask. He describes the same party, the same injuries, but from a different angle, like he's standing in another room. My mouth goes dry. I ask him who he is. He gives a first name only. It's different from the woman's. I ask if he knows her. He says no. He says she was already gone when he got there. I mute my mic and wave my trainer over. She frowns at my screen, at the gray line indicator. She tells me to hang up and reset. I tell her I can't. The call won't disconnect. While she's watching, the man on the line starts crying. He says someone just locked the doors. I unmute and tell him help is on the way, even though it isn't. My trainer tells me quietly that this number was disconnected before I was even hired. She says the address was rezoned and demolished after a fire. She says it like she's reassuring me, like that makes this make sense. The man's voice cuts out mid-sob. For a second there's silence, and then another voice comes on. A teenage girl this time. She's whispering. She says she hid in a bathroom. She says the countdown already happened, but nobody cheered. I ask her what she means. She says everyone just stopped, and then started screaming. She says she can hear someone knocking on the door now, asking to be let in, even though she knows they're already dead. I feel my hands shaking so badly, I have to press them flat against the desk. I ask my trainer if we can trace the call. She shakes her head, eyes wide now. She says the system can't see it. It's like the call isn't there. On my screen, the timer keeps resetting, never going past a few minutes. The girl on the line starts counting under her breath. I realize she's counting backward. She reaches 0 and then says it again slower. I tell her to stop, to focus on me. She asks me what year it is. I tell her. She goes quiet. Then she says, "That's not right," and the line switches again. Now it's the woman from the beginning. Her voice sounds tired. She tells me it's almost over. I ask her what happened at the party. She finally tells me. She says someone locked all the exits as a joke. She says fireworks were set off inside. She says people panicked. She says the fire spread faster than anyone expected. I wait for her to say it was an accident, but she doesn't. She says they didn't die right away. She says they kept calling for help, but the phones wouldn't work, except for this one. I ask her who she is. She says she was the one who made the call list. She says she chose this number. My trainer pulls me away from the desk, but I don't take my headset off. I can still hear the woman. She says the party happened years ago. She says the line was disconnected afterward, but it didn't stop ringing. She says every New Year's Eve, it finds someone new. Someone who listens. Someone who stays on the line. I tell her I'm just a trainee. She laughs softly. She says that's why it works. I ask her what she wants. She says she wants it recorded correctly. She says the official report said there were no calls for help, no chance of rescue. She says that's a lie. She asks me to log it as real. As answered. As failed. My trainer is talking to a supervisor now, both of them watching me like I'm about to break. I realize my fingers are still typing. The system isn't rejecting the input anymore. It's letting me write. The woman thanks me. She says the knocking has stopped. She says it's quiet now. I hear the background noise fade, one sound at a time, until there's only her breathing. Then even that stops. The line goes dead. This time, it really disconnects. The room feels wrong afterward, like the air is heavier. My trainer tells me to take a break. The supervisor asks me what happened. I tell them the truth, all of it. They exchange a look and say the call never existed. They show me the logs. There's nothing there. No record of the number, no trace of the voices. I tell them I typed a report. The system is blank. Everything I entered is gone. I finish my shift in a fog. When midnight hits, the other trainees cheer quietly, tired smiles, paper hats. I don't join in. I keep thinking about the address, about how clearly it was spoken, how real it felt. When I get home, I look it up on my own computer. I find an old news article buried deep in the results. A New Year's Eve party, a locked venue, a fire, multiple fatalities, no emergency calls logged. The address matches what they said, even though the street doesn't exist anymore. I don't sleep. In the morning, my phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize. I don't answer it. I let it ring until it stops. I tell myself it's over, that it only happens once. I make coffee and try to breathe normally. When I check my voicemail later, there's one new message. It's silent except for faint music in the background and the sound of someone counting down, starting from 10. I quit dispatch not long after. I tell people it was stress, that the job wasn't for me. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. Every New Year's Eve since then, I turn my phone off before midnight. I sit in a quiet room and watch the clock myself. When it reaches 0, I don't celebrate. I listen. Sometimes, very faintly, I think I can hear a phone ringing somewhere far away, still looking for someone to answer. I was dragging the last stack of folded chairs toward the storage corridor when the sound started. And I remember the exact thought I had, because it annoyed me more than it scared me at first. I thought someone had snuck back inside after midnight to keep drinking. I stopped walking, the chair legs scraping loud against the floor, and listened. It wasn't music. It wasn't laughter. It was voices, multiple voices, counting together in that familiar slow rhythm everyone uses at the end of the year. 10, 9, 8. They were muffled, like they were wrapped in fabric, but clear enough that I could make out the numbers without guessing. I stood there with my hands, still gripping the metal frame, heart thumping harder with each count, because I knew the building was empty. I had personally checked every exit, every bathroom stall, every rented room. I had signed off on the head count sheet myself. The last guests had left more than 30 minutes earlier, stumbling into ride shares and hugging each other in the parking lot. The contract was over. My shift was almost done. There was no reason for anyone to still be inside, let alone starting a countdown after midnight. 7, 6, 5. The sound was coming from the end of the corridor, from the direction of the old storage room. I hadn't thought about that room in years, mostly because it didn't factor into my job. It was listed on the building plans as sealed. No door, no access. Just a boxed-off space left over from some renovation decades ago. I had seen the wall myself. Smooth plaster, no handle, no seam, nothing. 4, 3. I let go of the chairs and took a step forward, telling myself this was probably some weird echo from outside. Maybe fireworks bouncing sound through the vents. But the voices were too close, too contained. They weren't echoing. They were inside the building with me. 2. My mouth went dry. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" under my breath, not because I expected an answer, but because I needed to hear my own voice to prove I was still alone. 1. The voices reached 0 together, and instead of cheering, instead of clapping or shouting Happy New Year, they stopped. Not faded, not trailed off. They stopped like someone had flipped a switch. The silence afterward was heavier than the sound had been. I waited, holding my breath without meaning to, listening for footsteps, laughter, anything. Nothing came. The corridor felt suddenly longer, like it had stretched while I wasn't looking. I walked forward, slow, my shoes squeaking faintly, and stood in front of the wall where the storage room was supposed to be. I put my palm against it, cold solid, no vibration. No hollow sound when I knocked, just a wall. I laughed, sharp and nervous, and shook my head. I told myself I was overtired. Long shifts do that. Being the night supervisor meant always being the last one left, always being the one who locked up and listened to the building settle. I had heard weird things before. Pipes, air vents. This was just another version of that. Then I looked down. There were footprints on the floor, starting a few feet from the wall and moving outward, toward me. Bare footprints, damp, as if whoever made them had just stepped out of water or snow, though neither existed anywhere near that room. They weren't smeared or partial. They were clear enough that I could see the curve of toes, the arch of a heel. I froze. My first thought was that someone had been hiding inside the wall somehow, which made no sense, but panic doesn't care about logic. My second thought was worse. The footprints were facing away from the wall, not toward it, away. I stepped back, my heel catching on something, and almost fell. The prints didn't move. They didn't fade. They just sat there, undeniable. I pulled out my phone and called the venue manager. It rang until voicemail. Of course it did. New Year's Eve. I left a message that probably sounded unhinged, saying there were people inside the building, saying something was wrong with the storage room. I didn't mention the footprints. I didn't know how to explain that without sounding like I was losing it. I crouched down and touched one of the prints with my fingertip. The floor was dry everywhere else. The print itself was damp and cool. Real. I stood up and walked the length of the corridor, checking every room again. My keys clenched tight in my fist. Everything was empty, locked, silent. When I came back, the footprints were still there, exactly the same. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car in the parking lot until dawn, watching the building through the windshield, half expecting someone to walk out through a wall that didn't open. Nothing happened. By morning, the prints were gone. The floor was clean, like they had never existed. I told myself I would forget it, and for a while I almost did. A week later, I was closing again, same hall, different event. No countdown this time, no voices. But when I walked past the storage wall, I noticed something new. A faint line in the plaster, vertical, like a seam that hadn't been there before. I ran my fingers over it. Still solid, still sealed. But the line stayed. I reported it. Maintenance came. They said it was settling. Old buildings do that. They patched it, painted over it. The line vanished. 2 weeks after that, another supervisor quit. She didn't give notice. She just left her keys on the desk with a note, saying she couldn't work nights anymore. She wouldn't say why. She wouldn't meet my eyes when I tried to ask. I started keeping notes. Not officially, just in my phone. Dates, times, sounds, anything strange. I noticed a pattern. The sounds only happened on nights when the building was completely empty. Not rented, not staffed. Just one person closing. Always after midnight. I volunteered to close alone on New Year's Eve the following year, partly because I needed to know, and partly because I didn't want anyone else to hear it. When the countdown started again, it was quieter, closer. I stood with my back against the wall, heart hammering, listening to the voices count down a year that had already begun. When they reached 0, I spoke out loud. "Who's in there?" There was a pause, then a single voice answered, calm and familiar. My voice. It said my name. I didn't run. I don't know why. Maybe because I was tired of being scared. Maybe because some part of me already knew. I pressed my forehead against the wall and asked what they wanted. The answer came not as words, but as images, sudden and overwhelming. Parties. Countdowns. People packed into rooms that no longer existed. The storage space hadn't always been sealed. It had once been a function room, small and cheap, rented out for private celebrations. Years ago, during a New Year's Eve party, a structural failure had trapped everyone inside. Fireworks outside masked the sound. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. The building had been renovated, the room erased, the incident buried in paperwork and insurance settlements. But the moment stayed. They weren't ghosts wandering halls. They were a loop, a memory with momentum. Every year, when the building was empty enough, quiet enough, the moment replayed, looking for witnesses. The footprints were from those who reached the wall, trying to leave. I understood then what they needed. Not escape, recognition. The next day I filed a report. Not about sounds or footprints, about the history of the building. I dug through archives, old council records, newspaper clippings. I found the incident. Obscure, minimized, but real. I brought it to the venue manager. I insisted the room be marked, acknowledged, not erased. They installed a plaque. Small, easy to miss. It named the people who died. It explained what the sealed space had once been. That New Year's Eve, there was no countdown. No voices. No footprints. I still work there. I still close at night. Sometimes I stop in front of that wall and rest my hand against it, not in fear, but in respect. Whatever was trapped there needed to be seen. Once it was, it let go. That's why I'm telling you this now. Not because it's scary, but because it's real. Some places don't want silence. They want to be remembered. I was leaning over the console, adjusting the paper feed, when the printer snapped to life on its own. The sudden whirring making me flinch hard enough that my chair scraped the floor. I remember muttering something under my breath and checking the wall clock, because the timing felt wrong. Midnight had just passed. The New Year siren from town had faded a minute earlier. I hadn't scheduled any output, and no automated alert should have triggered without my input. I reached for the printer as the sheet slid out, still warm, my name already printed at the bottom, like I had signed it myself. I skimmed the alert expecting corrupted data, maybe a misfire from the aging system. Instead, the report described freezing rain on Route 116, a multi-vehicle collision, and a delayed ambulance response. I stared at it, confused, because that had already happened earlier that evening. I'd heard it over the police scanner before coming on shift. The timestamps were wrong too, showing 12:04 in the morning as the issue time. My hands felt suddenly clumsy, and I checked the system logs, thinking maybe the clock had rolled over incorrectly. The logs showed nothing. No command entry. No remote access. The alert simply existed. I laughed once quietly, trying to shake the unease, and told myself old equipment does strange things when the year changes. Still, I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket instead of throwing it away. Something about seeing my name printed there bothered me more than the technical problem. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang. It was the regional dispatcher, asking why we were reissuing old alerts. I told her we weren't. She read back details from the notice that hadn't been public, including the injured driver's surname and the fact that a child's seat had been empty in the back. I remember gripping the receiver too tightly, my knuckles aching as I told her I would look into it. I pulled the earlier alert from the archive to compare them. They were identical, except for one line at the end that hadn't been there before. It listed the home address of the injured driver and noted severe complications occurring within 7 days. That information was not weather-related. It had no place in our system. I felt a slow, crawling cold move up my spine as the printer whirred again behind me. The second alert described a barn collapse from heavy snow load. That had happened just before dusk, 3 concessions north. I had helped issue the warning myself. This new alert included the farmer's full name, his wife's maiden name, and a note stating that the property would be vacated permanently within the week. I remember saying out loud, "That's not possible," as if the room needed convincing. I shut down the printer, physically pulling the power cable from the wall. The lights flickered but stayed on. For a moment, the silence felt heavier than the noise had been. I sat there listening to my own breathing, trying to slow it, telling myself to call maintenance in the morning. Then the dot matrix display on the console began updating by itself, characters appearing line by line without any audible input. The system displayed a third alert, scrolling slowly, deliberately, as if giving me time to read. It referenced a localized fog advisory near a rural stretch of road where a single car accident had already occurred hours earlier. The driver's name was listed, along with a note stating no remains would be recovered. I recognized the name. He lived 2 houses down from me. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over. I remember pacing, rubbing my hands together, my thoughts racing faster than I could organize them. I told myself this had to be some elaborate malfunction, maybe crossed data from emergency services. But we weren't connected to those databases. We never had been. The system was isolated by design. I called the station supervisor at home. He answered groggily, irritated, until I started reading him the alerts. There was a long pause on the line. He told me to shut everything down and leave the building. I asked him if he recognized any of the names. He didn't answer that question. He just repeated himself, more sharply this time. As I gathered my coat, the printer clattered again despite being unplugged. The paper slid out crooked, tearing slightly at the edge. I didn't want to look, but I did. This one mentioned a sudden pressure drop and heart failure in a male, age 42, employed at a local weather station. My address was printed beneath it. I don't remember driving home. I remember sitting on my couch fully dressed, lights on, listening to the radio for updates. By morning, the farmer from the barn collapse was missing. His truck was found abandoned near the property line. 2 days later, the injured driver from the earlier collision died from complications. By the end of the week, my neighbor's car was pulled from a ditch with no body inside. I went back to the station with the supervisor and 2 technicians. They found nothing wrong. No unauthorized access. No stored alerts. The printer worked normally when tested. They joked about New Year jitters. I didn't laugh. I watched the console the entire time, waiting for it to betray me again. It didn't, not while anyone else was there. The disappearances continued. Each one matched an alert that only I had seen. I stopped sleeping. I stopped answering the phone. I kept copies of every printed notice, hidden in a drawer at home, reading them over and over, looking for patterns. The details became more personal with each one. Childhood injuries, private arguments, things no public record could explain. The final alert printed 1 week after the first. It predicted a sudden atmospheric anomaly localized to a single residence. My residence. It stated that no external damage would be observed and that the subject would be unaccounted for by morning. There were no names listed this time. Just the phrase subject cleared. I waited for it to happen, sitting alone in the dark, listening to the clock tick past midnight again. Nothing dramatic occurred. No noise. No pain. Just a quiet sense of being erased, as if something had finished checking boxes. In the morning, I walked back to the station and resigned. I left the alerts with the supervisor, told him to burn them, and never looked back. People still vanish sometimes around St. Hyacinth quietly, without storms or warnings. When they do, I wonder if the system found someone new to listen. That is why I never celebrate New Year's Eve anymore, and why I don't trust silence after midnight. I was already standing in the hallway with my recorder raised when the woman across from me pressed her palms over her ears and whispered, "It's starting again," even though the corridor was silent. I glanced down at the screen, saw a clean flat line, and felt that familiar irritation tighten my jaw. I told her I didn't hear anything, that the device wasn't picking up so much as a breath. She shook her head and told me it never did. Not until the headphones were on. Not until midnight was close. I was working noise complaints for the regional council then, the kind of job that makes you skeptical by necessity. People hear pipes, wind, their own thoughts, and call it something external. Bendim Valley had been quiet for months, until just before New Year's Eve, when the calls started coming in, always after dark, always with the same report. A countdown. Clear as a voice beside them, they said. Loud enough to make their teeth ache. The woman's name was Clara. She lived alone, and the complaint log showed she had never called before. I asked her when it began. She said 4 nights ago, the first time at 11:48, counting down slowly, calmly, as if nothing were wrong. She said it reached 1, then started again at 10, then 9, never touching 0. I told her that wasn't how numbers worked. She smiled thinly and said she knew. I stepped back into the stairwell and slipped on my headphones, more to reassure her than myself. At first there was only the faint hum of the building, the small sounds I expected. Then, threaded through it, something else slid in, as clear as a voice speaking directly into my ear. 10, it said, not loud. Certain. I froze, my hand tightening around the recorder. 9. I pulled the headphones off so fast the cord snapped against my neck. The hallway was empty, quiet, normal. Clara watched my face, reading it, and I hated that she saw the change. I told her I needed to run some tests, that I would be back before midnight. I left without waiting for her response, my pulse thudding harder with every step. Back in the car, I tried to rationalize what I had heard. Interference, I told myself. Some kind of audio bleed. The equipment was old. My phone rang before I could finish the thought. Another complaint. Different address. Same report. I drove. By the third apartment, I stopped pretending this was coincidence. Each time, the sound only appeared through the headphones. Each time, it began at 10. Each time, it ended at 1 and looped back, never reaching 0. By the fourth, my hands were shaking enough that I had to sit down. At the fifth address, an older man named Ernst refused to let me remove the headphones. "You need to hear it all," he said. "You need to hear what happens when it ends." I told him it didn't end. He looked at me with something like pity and said, "It does. Just not for everyone." I stayed. I listened. The numbers fell steadily, calmly. 10, 9, 8. My stomach knotted with each one. When it reached 1, there was a pause longer than before. Then, instead of starting again, the voice said my name. I tore the headphones off and staggered back. Ernst didn't react. He asked me if it had said mine yet. I didn't answer. I left, ignoring protocol. Ignoring everything except the need to get out of that building. I spent the next day combing records, searching for patterns. Every address had reported the sound on New Year's Eve in different years. 1998, 2007, 2015. The same voice, the same countdown. Each time, one resident at each location had died shortly after midnight, officially of natural causes. None had complained before. I realized then what 0 meant, or rather what it replaced. I returned to Clara's apartment just before midnight on New Year's Eve, unable to stop myself. She let me in without a word. I put the headphones on and waited. The countdown began immediately. When it reached 1, the voice said my name again. Then it said no. There was no sound after that. Just silence. My recorder went dead. The pressure in my ears vanished. Clara exhaled and said it was over. She asked me what it had said. I told her the truth. She nodded as if that explained everything. At midnight, nothing happened. No fireworks, no noise, no voice. I stayed until morning. Clara was still alive. So was I. I filed my report the next day, complete, factual, and ignored. The case was closed as mass hysteria. I transferred departments. I stopped wearing headphones unless I had to. It has been years now. I still hear nothing. But every New Year's Eve, just before midnight, I feel the certainty settle in my chest, the sense of a number waiting to be spoken. I know that when it finally reaches 0, it will not be a sound I hear. It will be an action I take, and I will not be able to stop myself.